So we'd like to welcome everybody to this first new little segment that we've decided to do. Obviously, we're here with Tim, founder of Omnia, and I'm Jess, and I'm part of the content team for Omnia. So we've decided to get together and chat because we've been friends from back in the days when we were living in Singapore, and we've had some really interesting conversations about everything that's going on in the world, and of course, part and parcel with, you know, moving into the work of Omnia and the difference that we want to be able to make in the world is, of course, to be looking at everything that's happening around the globe and feeling into, you know, how are we showing up to be of service in this way. So I thought it'd be really interesting to join Tim to have these discussions, and particularly at the moment we've got all the controversy running around the planet on 5G and the virus and all this interesting stuff. So we're going to start there today. And yeah, I guess we're looking at having a more global perspective. I'm in Bali, Tim's in the UK, and we've got the male-female balance there as well. So we're going to, I'm going to be interviewing Tim and asking him some questions, and I'll offer up my opinions and thoughts as appropriate when needed as well. So yeah, I guess maybe we can, well, we'll start at the beginning, shall we? Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, not really. No, yeah, let's crack on.
Cool. So our first topic of choice, which is really exciting to me and interesting to me because there's so much information out there, and I'm trying to distance myself from information overload, is this connection that people seem to be making between 5G and the coronavirus. And so I guess my first question would be around what is actually happening with the 5G rollout. Is this a thing? Because I know we've spoken and you've shared with me about, you know, it just being more 4G to start with. And
that's it. Yeah.
So yeah, could you tell us?
Well, I mean, look, it's a huge topic, and I don't think anyone can really claim to know exactly, you know, what's going on in every country. I think everyone got very alarmed because they made a link between some of the hotspots for the virus, namely Wuhan, South Korea, Lombardy in Italy, and they worked out that, hold on, these are kind of like the forerunners for 5G. You know, these were like the kind of the poster cities for 5G, if you like. You know, it started in Wuhan, so people made a connection in their heads. But you know, what we're saying is that that you can't look at a mast that's been put up and say what level of radio frequency is coming from that mast. And what I know is that 5G is going to be a lot more 4G. First of all, consolidating all of that. And then there's going to be a slow and steady move. Well, it might even be quite fast, but there's going to be a move towards 5G, which is going to be like, you know, millimeter waves that are put up every 200 meters down your street, which is why they're considering using street lights to actually beam these frequencies at us. And that's when it gets really dangerous. But it's already dangerous. You know, all of my testing on the human body for Omnia has shown that the body does receive a subtle amount of stress every time you hold a phone or, you know, use a laptop or touch all of this imbalanced radiation. And so, you know, at the moment, what we're having is a lot of hysteria in you know, from the alternative channels, you know, the truth seekers, just saying, oh yeah, they're putting 60 gigahertz 5G in straight away. But that's not true, because you need a 5G phone to receive all of that, those millimeter waves. I've actually got a 5G phone because I have to test it for my job, sadly, you know. But I've got one that I switch on and off 5G and onto 4G and try and keep it as low radio frequency as possible. But I can't get a 5G signal. You know, I walk around London and I can't, you know. So my telco has sold me a bit of a lie there. Thanks for that. But it is all a big marketing campaign. Is what I'm trying to say, is that the whole marketing campaign is like, yeah, we're putting in 5G. Well, you know, what is it? And no one really seems to know. Not yet, anyway. You know, I'm doing my own little bit of research, but you know, it's huge. It's a huge topic because it'll be different in Lombardy to different in Wuhan to different in London. So my only summary is that they're putting, you know, more and more towers up. That's true. Those towers are going to provide better and better data services. That's true. But as we know, all man-made radiation fields carry an imbalance, and that imbalance is ingested, or you know, it affects the balance of the human cell, the electrical balance of the human cell. And on a subtle level with 3G and 4G, that was causing harm in the body. But as the intensity of the fields is ramped up, then that's going to cause more and more imbalance and unsettledness and stress in the body. And we all know that stress leads to disease. And that's been shown in 10,000, I think it's even maybe 30,000 now, but let's just say 10,000 peer-reviewed studies on rats. So, you know, all of this stuff is available online. And the distressing thing from my point of view is that I see a lot of media coverage, mainstream media coverage, I should say, which keeps saying there is no evidence that any radiation from and so on is unsafe. There's none. That's what they say, but that just isn't true. Wow, someone's just come in to stop the internet. That is literally a building against social distancing. There you go. Some live action for you.
Is that a plane going overhead?
It's not a plane. It's a helicopter.
Oh,
it's
amazing.
yeah. It's they're getting serious over here. They've so they locked down a park. There's a park in not too far away from where I live, and they locked the whole thing down because people were going in there. It was a beautiful weekend in London, and lots of people went into the park but kept their social distancing. So they closed down the park and then told everyone off. And this is the situation that we're in at the moment, where there's anomalies everywhere. Put it that way. You know, in Sweden, for example, they're allowed to gather 50 people at one time, and they're not observing social distancing. And yet their numbers per million people in terms of sufferers of the virus is very much middle of the road. I think they're something like 20 to every million people, right, in Sweden, and in many other countries where they're observing social distancing, it's much more. But then they'll come out and say, oh, but you know, everyone could have it right now. You could be carrying it, just don't know about it. So there's lots of anomalies. But I guess the summary from all of that is that, you know, what I know is that 5G is being seen as a critical service, right? It's being seen as something that is vital for all of our survival, and they're putting it in despite the lockdown. Sorry, excuse me. They're putting it in despite the lockdown. So while the lockdown is happening, they're running around and putting 5G masts up, and that's why people are getting upset. And even in the UK, they've started to burn down some of the masts, right? And what happens in that situation, and that's really stupid, by the way, we're not condoning that in any way at all. We want to have a sensible conversation based on real scientific studies that show that man-made radiation harms the human body. That's what we want. We don't want people burning down masts. That's just idiotic. But what, of course, that's done is that it's backfired in that all of the all the telcos are coming forward. I saw a post from O2 yesterday. The telcos are coming forward saying, listen, guys, you're knocking down all the emergency services. You know, you're burning down infrastructure that you know, we need to help to serve you during the times of the virus. So, of course, it's backfiring, and you know, people are going, oh, give us 5G properly, give us, you know, make sure it's safe and don't harm the people putting up the masks. It's just like, you know, so we're in that situation where, you know, it's really weird. If you zoom out from, you know, 1,000 miles or something like that and look at what's going on, it's pretty crazy, as I'm sure you're experiencing too.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't, not feeling it so much here. But
Yeah,
definitely in the news coverage and everything, it's, there's a lot of fear, and pretty
yeah,
understandably, if we are locked down at home already with that level of uncertainty with the pandemic across the planet, we, naturally there's huge amounts of fear that everybody's feeling. And I think a very easy response as human beings is to look for meaning, right? Is to look for meaning within everything. And quite often that presents itself as something or someone to blame, and
right.
not necessarily being able then to absorb all the possible facts or all the possible ideas, or see anything from a objective perspective. When we're driven by fear, we get very stuck in that. um
Yeah.
yeah, and I found it
Well, we're
really interesting.
meaning machines, aren't we? But that's what
Yeah.
we do. That's what our minds do. And, we try and make everything mean something, and try and, we're continuously trying to figure it out, right? That's a good thing and a bad thing. We have this amazing capability, unlike any of the animal kingdom, to try and figure it out. But during that process, the ego jumps in and goes, "Oh, I've got it, I'm right," and then just spreads out this, and people can often go off on a tip where they get it completely wrong, but they're so convinced that they've got it right that they stick to it, and then before you know it. And this is exactly what's happened with lots of people posting stuff about 60 gigahertz and the
Mm.
oxygen content being ruined, and people dropping down, fainting in the streets, and the lack of oxygen in their lungs. And I've seen so many alarmist videos going on around that it just actually it doesn't give us that chance to have the proper debate, and the proper debate should be around the scientific studies that have shown that there's all sorts of diseases caused by even 3G,
Mm.
and that's the debate that should be happening. But we live in a world where the mainstream media has all of their advertising dollars paid by who? It's the telcos, it's the Apples, it's the vote, it's the the Googles, the everything else. So that's the world that we're living in. I just want to make that clear to everyone that there's lots of truths out there, but they need to be dealt with in a balanced way. We need to have a proper discussion about this, which is like neutral and not influenced by the stakeholders.
Yeah.
Because there's a classic thing in if you study how how the safety is governed. There's one body called ICNIRP, right, which has an amazing influence. In the US, they've got the FCC, the Federal Communications something, and in the UK, or in Europe, I should say, they've got ICNIRP, who govern on what the safe standards are. And ICNIRP is funded by the phone industry, right? So you've got a conflict of interest straight away. And people need to know this, because they're putting stuff in their pockets, next to their ears, next to their genitals, etc. And there's harm being done on a subtle level at the moment. But that will get into, as the wayfields get more intense, that will get into to harm that's done a bit quicker. So we're in that situation where a forum where we can actually discuss all of these things is really, really important, because it's gonna be at our door very soon, and pretty soon we won't be able to do much about it. Like, while there's this lockdown going on, the emergency services that are seen to be 5G are being put up, and then we come out of the lockdown, and then suddenly it's like this, very, very um, strong kind of oven of microwave frequencies on our doorstep. Did we ask for that? Did we check that it was safe? I mean, there's a very, very famous speech by Senator Blumenthal in Congress, where he asks all the representatives of all the telcos, how much money have you spent on safety testing for 5G? And they all say $0. And that's just totally unacceptable. I mean, like, really, people, people need to be looking at what's really happened and make their mind up for whether they find that acceptable or not. It's not a time for just, you know, gulping down the mainstream narrative. It's a time for really using our minds productively and working out what we stand for, you know, what we're going to accept, what we're going to tolerate. You know, it is kind of like that. So, you know, I made my mind up a long time ago when I founded Omnia, because I found a product that really genuinely harmonized all radiation fields. But not only that, but I found that the inventor of the Omnia radiation balancer has a means by which we can potentially move into a world where all of that electricity, you know, from its base source is all balanced and in harmony with the planet and us. So that was super exciting to me, and I'm trying to spread that knowledge to whoever will listen, because the more people look at that and see it, then the quicker we can move into that reality.
And I think that's such an important point to make about coming from a place of harmony, and that's what, you know, we're really about at Omnia, is a balanced perspective, a balanced view and way of living and relating with the world. And I found it really, just to go back a couple points, I found it really interesting that you were saying you can't get a 5G signal on a 5G phone yet. And so that was just making me, you know, the way that I would perceive all the information that's out there, from my understanding, I would feel like somewhere like London is just overrun with 5G towers and signals right now. You know, that would be my perception. And that's not coming from the mainstream media. That's coming from media that is being put out by individuals. And I remember being taught in school, you know, in high school and in university, I did mass communications as studies in a diploma, and it was, you know, being taught, look at the media bias, you know, the same way you were saying this, what was it in the UK, the Federation looking after all of doing the testing,
ICNA.
funded, who it's, ICNA, who it's funded by. It's the same thing though. We've gotten to a place where we can't really trust the mainstream media all the time. We have to check that and look at that. But then there's so much out there from individuals and groups and movements as well that also have biases that we don't know about, that we may not know about. So we have to come into a place of really looking at the facts and really discerning what is actually true, so that we can come to a harmonized, balanced perspective and begin to deduce what is actually really going on. And so from what I'm understanding from what you're saying is that, you know, the 5G wave that we perceive to be coming, that's going to fry us all, is not necessarily actually even here yet. It's going to be, so we don't need to be panicking and burning down 5G towers. You know, we can actually start preparing and knowing what we need to put in place for this, and just being gently aware rather than panicking.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, you know, look, if you're sort of drawing it out, 4G operates at, I think, 2.6 gigahertz, right? That's what it goes up to. So the gigahertz is the amount of power that it can go up to, right? And the worry is that when you go from 2.6 gigahertz and you keep intensifying the power, then that power has an effect on our bodies, you know, quicker, right? Because that's the way it is, right? As soon as the power goes up, then we react more. And if you look at the spectrum of, because they have to basically put it out to tender for everyone to buy up certain spectrum bandwidths. And the spectrum for 5G goes from 2.6 gigahertz, and in fact, even lower than that. So they're putting lower gigahertz ranges in as well. I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but you know, yeah, I won't ruin the camera angle. But on the top of a block of flats behind us, right, about 200 meters, they actually went up and put these new transmitters up a couple of months ago. And I thought, oh my God, it's 5G, it's 5G. But then I thought to myself, well, hold on. Everyone's talking about 5G being the streetlight version where, you know, the millimeter waves are being beamed at us and they only have a range of 200 meters. But that isn't that, because that's the same thing as we had before, but a different transmitter. So maybe it's got that capability to go into the millimeter waves. Maybe that's what the technology is eventually able to deliver. But like I said earlier, you need a 5G phone to get a 5G signal. And I'm probably one of the only people who has a 5G phone, right? And that's because the network isn't live yet. And what they're saying in all of the media ads is, if you're very careful to notice this, we are building the UK's fastest 5G network. We are building it, right? So they are in the process of building this thing, which I have no doubt is going to be very, very toxic to the human body. And I'd like to set up a forum whereby we can actually have an open, you know, untainted and unfunded, with no conflict of interest, and an open forum where we can actually talk about all of that. But right now, it seems that, you know, if there is a heat map that I can point people towards, it doesn't cover the whole world, as in some parts of China. Well, most of China is not covered, but you can look at it for Milan, where there's a hotspot for 5G. You can look at it for London, which is, you know, getting a lot of cases, and so on, like Boris Johnson, sadly, you know, and so on. You know, and you can look at where 5G is. You can look at exactly where the towers are, and they're not every 200 meters, right? There's vast parts of London that are not covered, that don't have a single mast, right? So these are facts that we're looking at. This is like sort of real, you know, real life, you know, let's work it out for ourselves. If they're not going to tell us, let's work it out for ourselves. So that's where we are. And the other point I make to everyone is that radiation is all about proximity, right? So it's all about how close you are to the radiating device. So there's no doubt that something that is a transmitter is incredibly powerful. So if you stood next to that, or you lived next to that for, you know, a couple of years, say you had a transmitter within 100 meters of your house, if you lived next to that, then that is a very powerful field that you're exposing yourself to. But if it was like half a mile away, the reduction in power is significant. And what radiation is all about is proximity. So if you're holding a phone in your hand, it's way worse than living, you know, 500 meters away from a mast, right? And I've measured this. You know, I get my radio frequency meter out and I put it next to the phone. It goes berserk. You know, same thing for a laptop, same thing for a Wi-Fi router. So we've got to have that in context as well. It is about proximity. It's no point in going burning down a mast over there when you're holding a phone in your hand, which is much more powerful, right? You know, that's kind of like you've just shot the wrong target there. But, you know, what we represent in all of this is physics, you know, I wasn't a scientist before I met the scientist that I now work with. And he taught me exactly why a radiation field is imbalanced. And it's all to do with the electrical current in the radiation field, right, versus the balanced electrical current in all of our cells. So with that aha moment, it was like, well, we now know why this happens, and it's not because of heat. And here's the thing, the whole phone industry hides behind the physics that only heat from a radiation field can harm the human body. And the evidence to prove that that isn't the case is all of the tests that they've done on rats, which is 10,000 tests on rats. I can supply all the links to that. And that shows you that animals, living, breathing animals with electricity in their body, are responding to the electricity in the radiation field. So we now know that it's not just about heat. You know, heat can harm the human body, that's for sure. You know, like when it gets up to, you know, X-ray, you know, heat and that sort of thing, it can shake up the cells to a very, you know, dangerous level. That's why you only have a couple of X-rays per year, right? But on a lower level, what it does is it shakes up our body on a more subtle level. that we don't necessarily realize, right? So everyone's out there using their phones going, oh yeah, I'm fine. But actually deep down, it's basically causing a stress, it's causing complications that will show up later in your body. And it's very difficult for me to explain that to everyone, that this is going to show up later in your body, because everyone's going, oh, I'm fine now, you know. So that the point that I make is that we need to look at this new physics and really, you know, get to grips with it, because we are electric beings. We are everything in our body runs on electricity. You know, our heart is pumping electrical current into our body. We know that from what's it called, an ECG. You know, as soon as the electricity in your heart stops, you die. You know, on a very basic level, we are beings of electromagnetic frequency ourselves, and in fact, we are radiating too, with all that electricity in our body, right? So what happens is, because of the law of resonance, when we as electrical beings walk into a field of electricity which is in the same bandwidth, right, we then resonate with that. Yeah, we actually pick up the frequency. And the best example I can give of that is if you get two guitars, right? If you get two guitars with 6 strings, and they've all got different frequency bands for each string, right? And you put them next to each other, and you pluck one of the strings on one guitar, not all of them, just one, then what happens is, on the other guitar, that same string starts to resonate as well, right? Starts to vibrate in sympathetic, it's called sympathetic resonance with the other string. And that's exactly what happens with our bodies when we walk into a radiation field, right? We start to resonate with that frequency. But the problem is that radiation field has an imbalance in it. It has an uncenteredness. And we pick that up in ourselves on a very subtle level at the moment. But we can show it. We can show what happens in a muscle test. You know, I do lots of muscle tests, and that's kinesiology, to give it its proper term. And yeah, the other tests I do are on blood, on heart rhythms, which get very clearly affected. There are new tools out there that we can use to show very clearly that this type of radiation causes electrical stress in the body, and so on. And then, you know, our last test is on water crystals as well, and we're doing one on skin heat absorption as well, because that's important. There are some thermal effects from phones, but what we're seeing is most of the effects are non-thermal. They're all about the balance of the electricity in the radiation field versus the balance of the electricity in the human body.
Beautiful. So we can definitely, I mean, we know from the tests that there definitely are concerns with radiation on the human body and on our field. And we know that, I mean, we just have to look at, you know, different situations around the world. Like, I was just thinking, as you were speaking, I was thinking about Singapore, and how they said, you know, we're not allowing any vaping in Singapore because there are no long-term tests on what the health effects are, because this is something very new. And we know that, you know, they're not doing all the testing on this new type of radiation. It's like, well, you know, we don't know where that's going to end up going necessarily. Of course, we'll feel fine now, but we don't know in the long term how much worse this could get, right? Because this technology hasn't been around for generations and generations for us to see what those effects are. So I guess with that,
which is sensible, I guess on one level it's sensible, you know, because what they're saying is that, you know, everyone started smoking cigarettes or whatever, and it was ages before they worked out that they were really harmful. And now they're using that model to say, well, we don't know about vaping yet, so, you know, we can't give it an approval yet, you know. And I guess that's sort of sensible, if you like. But, you know, if you apply that to the phone industry, then yeah, absolutely, they've actually gone up in front of Congress and said we've done no safety testing. And
so it's interesting, you know, that's the case, isn't it? It's like there are models clearly to show us in history that things that we thought were fine are not for the human body, you know, and those assumptions create very, I know we were chatting and I said, you know, the radium girls in the, I can't remember what the dates were, but 100 years ago, that, you know, were painting radium onto clock dials and things, and then got very, very ill. And there can be a lot of loss of life from that and those kind of mistakes. So I guess what I was thinking about with that,
I think there is a story about Marie Curie as well, who did a lot of, might get this wrong, but I'll have to sort of correct myself later if I do get it wrong. But she worked with a lot of radio frequency and she ended up suffering from the thing that she was administering. So yeah, I'll have to come back to that and square that off and do my proper research. But yeah, exactly like you're saying, it's there are many cases, like I just said, asbestos. We talked about smoking. We talked about things that we all thought were okay for us, and then eventually we went, oh, hold on. And then when the truth comes out, it's like, oh, that's really obvious. It's really obvious that we're electrical beings with hearts that pump, and even our brain waves are electrical, waves. We know that alpha waves, beta waves. You know, they've done all gamma waves. They've done all this, research on the human brain. Brain waves are electrical currents.
Yeah, and I think it's
and you wouldn't get into a car that wasn't safety tested, right? You just wouldn't get into a car that wasn't safety tested. So on that level alone, there's a discussion to be had. But at the moment, all discussions are being locked down. This whole lockdown is going into realms where we're actually being denied our own freedom of speech, our own freedom of thinking. It really is getting a little bit like 1984, sadly. Yeah,
it is, and the discussions are really important, because it's just a bit like, the Einstein quote of, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Like, we have examples from history to show that, running things without testing them is a terrible idea, and can have terrible consequences. But I guess it's for people out there who've perceived Omnia as a company that, is sort of like almost anti 5G, I guess coming back to, being able to share that it's like, actually, this is why we have the Omnia patch, the Omnia radiation balancer, is because it's not about being anti 5G necessarily. It's more about, can we bring everything back into balance, and being like, asking, trying to give the proper information, trying to give correct information, factual information, and to be able to kind of bust some of the sensational myths around it. And do we need to fight against anything in this world, or is there always going to be a way? And I think the orb, the patch, demonstrates this beautifully, where everything can exist in harmony. Maybe 5G can be a positive thing if we have something to balance the radiation. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and kind of how this, literally is from a product to an idea that can be applied to everything, where we don't have to fight anything necessarily, but to just to balance it.
And that absolutely. And that's why I'm excited to be working with the scientist as well, is that he represents the idea that all imbalanced frequencies can be brought back to balance, right? And that's what we need to do on a fundamental level to stop our body's electricity reacting from the imbalance from the wave field. So that's the really positive news that he represents. So I'm excited about that. We've, in terms of like the way that we use data, the horse has bolted. We're all now, totally into our screens, probably too much, but that's a topic for another day, in terms of, obsession and an addiction to digital stuff and whatever. But the point is, we use it at work, we use it in the family, mums rely on it, everyone relies on it, emergency services, like we said earlier on, rely on it. It's here to stay. We now need to work out what it is truly in the radiation field that harms us. And I think that we have very specific knowledge about that in terms of the electrical spin, because what I'm finding is that all the biologists are saying, yeah, well, there's a voltage-gated calcium channel around the outside of the membrane of the cell, and that gets super excited, and it lets too much calcium in, and that causes an oxidative nitrosative stress disorder, and that leads to free radicals, and that leads to disease. And that's great, because they've worked out the mechanism of what happens, to the cell when these two fields meet. But what we're saying is, before that, look at the electrical component of this. Look at the wave field that radiation is. Look at the wave field in the electricity of the human cell. Work out why those two conflict and don't get on, and then fix bring that electrical current into balance, so that it's like the sun. It's actually a balanced wave field. So a lot of people get confused, right? They say, well, radiation level is way lower than the sun, and if the sun was that bad for us, then that if lower level radiation was that bad for us, then we'd all be getting killed by the sun. Yeah, but the fundamental difference is, and the sun is the giver of all life. Nothing would exist without the sun. We wouldn't have any food to eat, and so on. Our bodies rely on the sun to live. Yes, we get sunburn because it's very, very hot, and especially me. But the point is, the point is that the fundamental difference in the wave field between the sun and electrical current that man produces is that the electrical current in radiation fields is imbalanced and uncentered. And we can do another show about this, because it's going to go too deep, I think. But ultimately, this is all about 0-point physics. It's all about the position of the 0 point within the electrical wave field, the position of the 0 point in our bodies versus the position of the 0 point in the man-made radiation field. And that's why there's that conflict between the two. So what we represent is knowledge that allows us to understand and have that aha moment to say, oh, I see. That's why we get. So ultimately, the electromagnetic spectrum that said that only these things that cause heat were harmful is not actually right anymore. That's not correct. There's another thing that actually can harm us. And then we work that out, and then we go, okay, so how do we bring these massive infrastructures that we're putting in place, how do we bring them to balance? How do we make sure that they're more like the sun, more kind of beneficial and in resonance with not just human life, but all life, all nature? How do we do that? And that's the physics, that's the breakthrough in science that I think 5G is asking us to make. It's asking us to make that breakthrough so that we can survive it. It's asking us to step up and go, wait a minute, we need new knowledge about all scientific concepts in order for us to actually make that safe and move into a world where, where we do make sure that when we do massive infrastructure rollouts, that they're safe.
That's really beautiful. So it's almost like this invitation. I mean, me, I'm very much from an energetic perspective and look for the blessing in every challenge, and the wisdom that, because we don't grow through ease and grace, we grow through challenge and needing to rise to the occasion, and otherwise we don't pay attention. If something doesn't cause us some pain in the process, quite often we just ignore it. So that's a beautiful perspective that, perhaps that's what the 5G is here to teach us, that we have to be aware of these things and not just accept something that may not be safe for us, but actually evolve and grow into the next thing. And I think that's we should do a little shout out to the telcos and be like, so we have the technology. If you all need to make these things safe,
come and find us,
guys. Yeah. Just to let you know.
Yeah, just
this is what we're doing.
All of your families are being affected too. It's just you don't know the right science yet. So that's really big news, isn't it? Lots of people are literally fronting up for something that's actually harming them without realizing it, and it's just insane. It really is insane what's going on. I'm having discussions with my family where they don't believe what I'm saying, and I'm like, you're just not. You're not thinking this through. You're not looking at the evidence that's being put forward, and this is very easy to do. But I think part of the reason why people have, shall we say it, cognitive dissonance, or I don't know, willful ignorance, whatever you might want to call it, is because the world that you're describing is quite scary. The world you're describing, where someone is putting up this infrastructure that's actually harming the human race, is actually a really scary world, and people don't want to look at that. And I understand that, I get that, but ultimately, what would you rather know, the truth, or or just carry on, towards your own demise? Because what we know about, for example, effects of radiation on fertility is really scary. I mean, this is like literally, phasing out the effectiveness, the reproductive effectiveness of the human race. That's what we're talking about here. Phasing it out, and not just not just in like 100 years time, but in very few generations. The fertility rates are already going dropping like that, and of course they never consider radiation as anything that could be harming you, because they always go back to the electromagnetic spectrum and say, well, it's not causing any heat, so therefore it's not doing any harm. And that is just what we're saying, is that that's wrong.
Absolutely. And science is only really just starting to pick up on all of these things, like epigenetics and all of these very, very new categories of science that are coming more and more to the forefront, and that people have bashed as pseudoscience and not real and everything else. But these are, like physicists and biologists who've been really looking at the detail of it all and are showing us that there's so much more than just heat energy in the world. And there's much more that we can be paying attention to. Just because we don't know it's there doesn't mean it's real. Doesn't mean it's not real. So needing to be aware of those things and being ready to adapt alongside it. And I think that, and this is, I guess, what we would say to people out there who are like, oh my God, it's all terrible. It feels very overwhelming. And that's why we can't deal with this. If there's only one picture, which is 5G is terrible and it's going to kill us all, then that's too big for any of us to feel like we can do anything about it. It's way too big for us as human beings. And we become immobile, we become paralyzed, we can't do anything to stop it. Or we react in absolute fear-driven anger, frustration, and we go mad and burn 5G towers down.
Yeah.
Also not helpful. Instead of going, actually, what if, and I know Dr. Lackey, the inventor of the patch, has this very, very beautiful perspective of, we are all one. All is in the one. The one is in the all, and the all is in the one. And so that means that there is, to everything that there is a challenge with, there will always be a solution that is presented as well, because it just has to be so. In the balance of the 0-point physics understanding of the world, there has to be a solution to it. And it seems we've been taught that there has to be a trade-off for everything. We can't have it all. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Like, these are common phrases, but what if we can? What if we can have 5G, have it be positive with the technology that's going to allow us to make it safe? It doesn't have to be a trade-off, our health for faster connectivity, right?
100%. We are master creators. That's what he believes. We are masters of this reality. He does talk about the fact that all of his physics points to and backs up the principle of the holographic universe. The idea that every atom in our bodies, in this chair, in a wall, every atom is a flicking ring of light that flicks on and off. It literally it compresses itself into a light ring, and then it expands itself, and it flicks on and off, on and off, on and off. And the oscillation between it making itself and then discharging itself is what we call frequency. And that is what is going on inside every atom of the whole universe. And within that universe, sorry, I've got another helicopter above me. It might be a bit noisy, but within that universe, the most powerful force is conscious human intent within that holographic universe. Right? We have the gifts as mental beings of really being able to affect things and create solutions and build bridges or build 5G towers or, or develop incredible medicines or whatever it is, right? We have that ability to do all of those incredible things. So it's not beyond us to produce a harmonized version of 5G. It's not beyond us. That's the crucial thing that we all need to get to grips of, rather than, as you say, rather than burning down 5G towers, which is just, an act of being scared.
Yeah. What do you think? So if we were to really anchor that idea that, we are powerful beings, we hold this power of intention, conscious creation energy within us, what would you say that we can do now? What would be obviously, just shameless, of course, this is our platform, so shameless plug of the orb, of course. Get those right away. I'm patched up at my house, and I tell you what, I can physically feel the difference. But other than this, what can we do right now? What perspective do we need to be holding for ourselves to create hope and actually to hold balance in our own energy field in our bodies at this time?
It's a good question, and we've been talking a little bit about the fact that we are masters of our own reality. We're our masters of our own energy field, our own bodies. We can decide what we put into our bodies. We can decide what career we have, who we hang out with, all of those things. These are all mental powers that we take for granted. But one thing I've been saying recently is, because there's so much fear mongering going on, and so much there's quite a lot of depression going on as well, and I've had moments where I've been pretty down as well, by the whole kind of lack of social interaction and, not being able to do anything that I want to do, and, things that bring me joy, I'm like going out dancing and stuff like that, can't do it, and, all these things are challenges. It's a challenge to sort of go within and clear out a few things and sort of sit with yourself a little bit more. But what I say is that imagine if you've got like a 2-meter bubble all the way around you, and it's up to you what you fill that bubble with, whether you fill it with an intention for the future which is harmonized, an intention for the future which is fair, let's imagine that another thing that isn't fair is that 1% of the population have like 50% or more of the money. Is that fair? What do we want? Right now is a really good time for reflecting on what society we want to see in the future. Do we want to be living in harmony with the earth? Do we want to be chucking plastic everywhere? Do we want to be, fried by, no, I shouldn't say fried, I should be imbalanced, to use the technical term, by 5G networks? Do we want to know the truth about physics? Do we want to know the truth about energy, and electrical current and how it spins? Do we want to step into a world where we're much more attuned to what's, how nature wants us to be living? How we survive with nature? Because at the moment, I think everything's just gone into overdrive of mass consumption of stories and to a large extent lies through digital devices, that have us completely glued to screens. And I'm the same. Sadly I fall into that trap too. But my idea of building Omnia up is to be eventually more free to actually practice more of what I preach in that respect. But yeah, what are you filling your bubble up with? What are you filling it up with? Love, with harmony, with good thoughts, or are you just raging about things? And are you in fix it mode, where I want to fix everything, I want to figure everything out, I want to tell someone else that they're wrong, and I want to where are you at? This is a great time to go through that reflection process. And it works. And the other thing is that as you well know, I do a lot of muscle testing. And one thing that I was really surprised by recently was I was testing someone, and they were religious, and they said, "Oh, can we say a little prayer and see if that affects anything?" So we said a prayer together. And for those who unfamiliar with muscle testing, you use your body strength to tell you whether it's sensitive to something or not. And so you can hold your arm out and pull down on your arm, or you can do a test behind the back. There's many different ways you can test the muscle strength, which shows you whether your whole body is allergic to something or sensitive to something or not, right? And here's the news: 100% of people are sensitive to a mobile phone, right? They all go weak. I've not had one single person who hasn't gone weak when they've been tested. But when we said the prayer and we put a phone in the pocket, right, and we said the prayer, that person went super strong, which just shows you the power that you have over your energy field, despite whatever toxin is coming into to your field. You have that power to balance yourself up and harmonize yourself despite any threats that come in. But the problem is that you'd have to say that prayer all day, because it doesn't last forever. It wears off, like all thoughts. It doesn't stay there forever. And I guess just for another plug for Omnia is that what we do is we perpetuate that prayer. We put that prayer into a patch that then lasts forever. It never runs out and it's always on. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to say that prayer anymore. But the reason I said that is to give an example that we do have more power than we consciously realize to actually clear out our field, correct our field, align our field, stay in balance, and be the best version of ourselves. So that's what my advice would be right now during all of these challenges, that we got from lockdown to, worrying about the virus to worrying about 5G and everything else. Just make sure that you are staying in your center, staying in your heart, and thinking good thoughts.
Absolutely. And I mean, we would probably class, emotions like anger and stress and things like this as toxins that we're creating in our own body. Hey, because it's, releasing cortisol, right, and all the stress hormones and all of this. So although things may seem,
that's it, all of our thoughts directly impact our DNA. Yeah. Our thoughts directly impact our DNA. And like you were saying earlier on, all this new research is coming out which shows it. So yes, being less susceptible, shall we say, to all the media noise, and more in control of what you're thinking and where your intentions lie, is fantastic. Is where is my advice for everyone, anyone that's listening.
Yeah, I found very early on that I needed to pull myself away from watching all the news stories all the time, because I actually physically started to feel quite unwell from it, and really tired, and really tense, and it was really actually started to drain a lot of my energy, because I was activating fear states in my body, which is like, fight, flight, adrenaline, and it uses up a lot of energy all the time. And so I think the flip that I've made and would also recommend to people is bring it in closer, that idea of the bubble, like come into your bubble and find what's meaningful and positive within there. So instead of looking for huge meaning on the global stage, just coming into very simple things, like I'm feeling grateful that I have more time to do some yoga, grateful that I have, more time to be focused on reading a particular book that I'm enjoying, or whatever it is. So finding those positive moments closer to home as well, rather than needing to go and look further out. There's lots to be grateful for, and to create harmony and balance in that way as well. And happiness is great for your immune system.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, for sure. And it is a time to be calling people up and just people you haven't seen for ages and so on, because there's a lot of downtime right now, and the things that, like I said earlier, the things that bring me happiness being denied. I'm being denied them, and we all are, and that's fine, because it's for the collective good, greater good. But yeah, just not going too much into your shell as well, making sure that the things that you enjoy, you still give some energy to, and so on. Yeah,
absolutely. Beautiful.
So do we need to be making any connection between this 5G and coronavirus in any way?
I don't think so yet, but the one connection that I can be absolutely sure of is that all radiation fields pose a stress to the immune system, you know, and this again is something that I'm going up against the mainstream on, because they're trying to tell you that there's absolutely no cause for concern, and they wheel out the electromagnetic spectrum again and again, and they just point to that and go, that's it, that's the end of the argument, and it absolutely isn't. Completely isn't. That's a lie. I'm calling them out now. That's a complete lie. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of reports on rats that show that they get harmed by this level of radio frequency, right? So the question is, what is it within the radiation field? As we've explained earlier on, it's the imbalance of the radiation field which causes our bodies to become imbalanced. So what we know is that the electrification of the atmosphere and more and more and more radio frequency will have some effect on the human body. We just don't know what the tipping point is, right? We don't know what the point at which we turn up all of the radio frequency to a point where it's like suddenly the human body goes, I can't take this anymore. So we don't know what that point is. And that's why people are getting upset and scared. I can't say that we've reached that point already. I just don't know if we have, because as I've said earlier, holding a 4G phone in your hand exposes you to a very intense direct form of radiation, and putting a 5G tower up 200 meters away, yeah, it's a stronger field, but ultimately it's further away from you, and unless you've got a 5G phone, you're not connecting to it, I don't think. You know, I'm happy to be proven otherwise by anyone who works in telco infrastructure or anything like that, but that's the way I see the world at the moment. And the bottom line is, what I stand for is that all radiation fields have to be harmonized. I believe that we have a very, very important product in that respect, very, very important science in that respect. And yeah, I'd like more and more people to open their minds to see that truth.
Beautiful. Well, this has been an amazing first of our coffee chats with Omnia. Woo.
Coffee chats. Yeah. Global coffee chats brought to you by wireless radiation. But yeah, but harmonized. Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Been really good chatting.
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful. All right, and we'll look forward to you next time. Nobody panic. Stay safe. Be healthy. And be well.
Be healthy. Yeah.